Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The cathedral fell silent as James Harrington's footsteps echoed against the marble floor. Each step he took away from the altar sent shockwaves through Emily Thompson's body. Her hands trembled around the bouquet of white roses that now seemed to mock her, their white petals blurring through her tears as the man she'd loved for 3 years walked away without a backward glance. James. Her voice broke on his name, barely a whisper. Yet it carried through the stunned silence of the cathedral. He paused at the grand double doors, but didn't turn around, his shoulders tense beneath his custom tuxedo, the one she'd helped him choose, her fingers tracing the seams with anticipation of this very day. "I can't do this." His voice was cold, detached. "I'm sorry." And then he was gone, leaving nothing but the lingering scent of his cologne and 300 guests staring at the abandoned bride. Emily's chest constricted, her lungs refusing to draw breath. The cathedral spun around her as whispers erupted, a rising tide of gossip that threatened to drown her. Her mother's anguished cry from the front pew barely registered. The diamond-encrusted bodice of her gown, the gown she'd spent months selecting, suddenly felt like a cage crushing her ribs. She swayed slightly, her knees threatening to buckle beneath the weight of her humiliation. Emily, her maid of honor, Sophia, reached for her arm, her face a mask of practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "Let me take you to the back room." Emily recoiled from her touch, something primal, warning her away from the woman who'd been suspiciously absent during the morning preparations. The pieces suddenly aligned with devastating clarity: Sophia's recent late nights, James's unexplained absences, the text messages he'd hidden from her. "Don't touch me," Emily whispered, her voice finding strength in the depths of her pain. Her father appeared at her side, his dark face contorted with rage and sorrow. "Baby girl, let's get you out of here." But Emily couldn't move. If she moved, if she acknowledged what had happened, it would become real. This nightmare playing out before hundreds of witnesses would crystallize into her reality. From the third row, a man stood up. Daniel Grayson had come to this wedding with one purpose: to witness James Harrington's perfect day and catalog every detail of his happiness. The man had destroyed Daniel's family business, driven his father to an early grave, and now lived the charmed life that should have been Daniel's. The invitation had come through business channels, to a power move on James's part, a reminder of who had won their personal war. Daniel had accepted with cold calculation, planning to use the memory of James's happiness against him in the future when he finally executed his revenge. Instead, he found himself watching a woman being destroyed in the most public, cruel way imaginable, and something inside him responded to her pain with unexpected ferocity. Emily Thompson stood at the altar, abandoned but somehow regal in her devastation. Her deep brown skin seemed to glow against the white lace of her gown, capturing light. Even as her world collapsed around her, Daniel had seen her before in photographs with James, at a distance during charity functions, but he'd never truly looked at her until this moment. She was magnificent in her pain. Without conscious decision, Daniel moved forward. The crowd's whispers intensified as he approached the altar, his tailored Italian suit setting him apart from the other guests. Some recognized him. Daniel Grayson, the man who'd risen from the ashes of his family's destroyed legacy to build an empire that now threatened James's own. Emily's tear-filled eyes met his confusion momentarily. Overtaking her anguish, he didn't know what drove him, perhaps the recognition of a fellow wounded soul, perhaps something more primal, a possessiveness he'd never experienced before. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her standing there, a sacrifice to James's cruelty. Daniel stepped before her, close enough to catch the scent of jasmine in her perfume. Her dark eyes widened as he reached up, his thumbs gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. "He never deserved you," Daniel said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Her lips parted in surprise, the softness of her breath warming his wrists. For a suspended moment, the cathedral disappeared, and there was only this woman, whose pain had somehow broken through years of his carefully constructed emotional walls. And then Daniel did something neither he nor anyone else expected. He leaned forward and kissed her. The touch of his lips against hers was gentle yet commanding, a promise and a question wrapped in one gesture. He felt her stiffen in shock, then soften almost imperceptibly against him, a surrender so slight he might have imagined it. When he pulled back, her eyes had changed. Confusion and something else, something electric had replaced some of the desolation. "Marry me instead," he whispered against her lips, the words emerging from some hidden part of himself he hadn't known existed. The collective gasp of the crowd broke their momentary isolation. Emily's father stepped forward, his expression thunderous, but Emily raised her hand to stop him, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice remarkably steady despite the tears still clinging to her lashes. "The man who will never walk away from you." The words emerged with a certainty that should have frightened him. Daniel Grayson. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She knew his name, knew the rumors of his ruthless business tactics, knew of his rivalry with James. What she couldn't know was how the sight of her abandoned at the altar had awakened something fiercely protective in him that transcended his plans for revenge. "Why would you want to marry me?" Her voice held the first hints of anger, a welcome heat replacing the chill of shock. "Because I recognize strength when I see it," he answered truthfully. "And because no one should have the power to destroy you like this, least of all him." The cathedral seemed to hold its breath as Emily looked at him. The bridal bouquet trembled in her hands, white rose petals drifting to the floor between them like snow. "This is insane," she whispered, but something in her expression had changed, hardened into resolve. "Probably," Daniel agreed, holding her gaze. "But I'm still offering." Emily looked over his shoulder at the empty doorway where James had disappeared. She looked at the front pew where her mother sat weeping. She looked at Sophia, whose practiced sympathy had given way to unmistakable alarm. Then Emily Thompson did something that would change both their lives forever. She placed her hand in Daniel's. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's perfect acoustics. "I'll marry you instead." And as Daniel's fingers closed around hers, as gasps and murmurs erupted around them, as her father swore and her mother cried out, Emily felt something shift inside her, something that felt dangerously close to power returning to her veins. She had no way of knowing that for Daniel, the touch of her hand in his felt like claiming something he hadn't known he was missing until this very moment. Chapter 2. Desperate Surrender. This is absolute madness. Emily's father, Judge Robert Thompson, paced the small antechamber off the main cathedral hall, his distinguished gray hair disheveled from repeatedly running his hands through it. "I won't allow it. With respect, Sire, your daughter is 30 years old." Daniel Grayson stood by the window, sunlight casting sharp shadows across his angular face. "She doesn't need your permission." Emily sat silently between them, still in her wedding gown, her mind oddly detached from the chaos surrounding her. An hour ago, she'd been abandoned at the altar by the man she'd loved for 3 years. Now she was considering marrying a virtual stranger, a man known for his ruthless business tactics and the iciness of his demeanor, a man who had kissed her with unexpected tenderness while she stood devastated before 300 witnesses. "Emily, baby." Her mother knelt before her, taking her hands. "You're in shock. You don't know what you're doing." "Actually, Syndrome," Emily finally spoke, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know exactly what I'm doing." She looked up at Daniel, studying him properly for the first time. Tall, with the lean, muscular build of a man who kept himself in rigorous physical condition, dark hair cut expensively short, just beginning to gray at the temples, despite him being only in his late 30s. And those eyes, pale bleu, almost silver in certain light, currently watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him directly. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "I have my reasons." A corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been amusement. "Does it matter? You need an exit strategy from this humiliation." "I'm offering one." Her father made a sound of outrage. "You think marrying some shark circling my daughter's vulnerability is an exit strategy? Better than being the woman James Harrington left at the altar," Daniel countered, his eyes still on Emily. "By tonight, everyone in Atlanta will be talking about how Emily Thompson chose the better man in the most dramatic way possible. The narrative changes from abandonment to empowerment." Emily stood up, the heavy silk of her gown rustling with the movement. "May I speak with Mr. Grayson alone, please?" "Absolutely not." Her father started, but her mother laid a restraining hand on his arm. 5 minutes, Helen Thompson said, her eyes conveying a silent message to her daughter. "Be careful." When the door closed behind her parents, Emily turned to face Daniel fully. "What do you really want from me?" Daniel moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and subtle, with notes of cedar and amber. Companionship, a socially advantageous marriage, the envy of Atlanta society. His voice dropped lower, and the look on James Harrington's face, when he discovers that the woman he discarded is now mine. The raw possessiveness in that last statement sent an unexpected shiver down Emily's spine. "So I'd be a trophy, a pawn in whatever game you're playing with James." Daniel reached out, his fingertips lightly tracing the curve of her cheek. The casual intimacy of the gesture should have offended her. Instead, it sent heat blooming beneath her skin. "You would be my wife," he said simply, "with all the protections and privileges that entails. I have a prenuptial agreement already prepared that is exceedingly generous to you." "You came prepared," she observed, stepping back from his touch. "I'm always prepared." His eyes followed her movement. though I'll admit, this particular scenario wasn't one I'd anticipated. Emily turned away, moving to the window. Outside, guests were still lingering on the cathedral steps, speculating about the drama unfolding inside. She caught sight of Sophia slipping into her car, James's car. The final confirmation of their betrayal twisted in her chest like a knife. "What are your terms?" she asked without turning around. She heard him move closer. I felt the heat of his body behind her without him actually touching her. "1 year," he said, his breath stirring the loose curls at her nape. "Live with me as my wife for 1 year. Attend social functions. Present a united front to the world. Share my home and my name." Emily turned to face him, finding him closer than she'd expected. "And my bed." Something darkened in his eyes, hunger, perhaps, or appreciation for her directness. "That would be entirely your choice," he said, though his gaze, dropping briefly to her lips, suggested his preference. "Why me? Why not just find someone willing? There must be dozens of women who would jump at the chance to marry Daniel Grayson." His smile was sharp, almost predatory. "Hundreds, but none of them would infuriate James Harrington like you will." The honesty of his answer should have repelled her. Instead, something dark and wounded inside her responded to the promise of revenge. "So, we'd be using each other. A mutually beneficial arrangement," he corrected. "You avoid becoming an object of pity. I gain a beautiful, intelligent wife from one of Atlanta's most respected families, and we both get to watch James suffer." Emily studied him, this man who had offered her escape from public humiliation. There was cruelty in him. She could see that clearly, but also something else. Something that had compelled him to step forward when she was at her most vulnerable. "I have conditions," she said, his eyebrow arched with interest. "Name them." "I maintain my career. I'm not giving up my position at the Thompson Foundation." He nodded. "Agreed. Separate bedrooms, until I decide otherwise." Another nod, slower this time. "As I said, your choice entirely, and I want the truth." She finished. "Not now, necessarily, but someday I want to know the real reason you're doing this." Something flashed in his eyes, surprise. "Respect, perhaps both." "Agreed," he said, extending his hand. "Do we have a deal?" "Miss Thompson." Emily looked at his offered hand, then back at the closed door behind which her parents waited, concerned and confused. Beyond that door was a cathedral filled with witnesses to her humiliation, a city ready to turn her abandonment into gossip, and somewhere out there, James and Sophia, celebrating their victory over her. She placed her hand in Daniel's, feeling the heat and strength of his fingers as they closed around hers. "It's still Mrs. Harrington legally," she said. "The marriage license was already filed last week." Daniel's eyes darkened with something dangerous. "We'll fix that immediately. I have a judge who owes me a favor. He can perform the ceremony today. Now, if you wish." The speed of it all should have frightened her. Instead, Emily felt carried along by a current too powerful to resist, or perhaps she simply no longer had the will to fight. "What about all these guests?" she asked. "Let them stay," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "Let them witness you choosing a better man. Let them carry that story back to James." The darkness of his proposal called to the wounded, angry part of her soul that wanted to hurt James as badly as he'd hurt her. "Yes," she said simply. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. "Yes to the wedding, or yes to all of it." Emily looked up at him, at this beautiful, dangerous man who had appeared at the moment of her greatest humiliation to offer salvation wrapped in revenge. "Yes to all of it," she whispered. "Make me your wife." Daniel Grayson. Something flashed in his eyes, triumph, possession, and perhaps something deeper he himself didn't recognize. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. Then, "Let's not keep our audience waiting," he said. An hour later, standing before the same altar where she'd been abandoned, Emily Thompson became Emily Grayson. She wore the same gown, held the same bouquet of now wilting white roses. But as she spoke her vows to a man she barely knew, as his ring slid onto her finger, replacing the one James had given her, Emily felt something harden inside her, a protective shell forming around her heart. When Daniel sealed their vows with a kiss, his lips were possessive against hers, one hand curving around her waist to draw her against him. The kiss deepened unexpectedly, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips in a silent demand. She found herself answering without thought. Heat bloomed between them, surprising in its intensity. When they parted, his eyes had darkened to stormy blue, and Emily felt the first fluttering of something beyond gratitude and revenge, something dangerously close to desire. "Mine now," he whispered against her lips, too low for anyone else to hear. The possessiveness of his words should have offended her. Instead, they sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. As Daniel led her back down the aisle, past shocked faces and whispered speculations, past her weeping mother and grim-faced father, Emily felt strangely liberated in her desperation. She had surrendered to this man and his agenda, but in that surrender, she had reclaimed some measure of power. She was no longer the woman James Harrington had abandoned. She was the woman Daniel Grayson had claimed. Chapter 3. Consuming flames. Daniel's oceanfront mansion loomed against the darkening sky. A modern fortress of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Emily stared through the car window as the security gate swung open, automatically recognizing Daniel's vehicle. 3 stories of architectural perfection rose before her, walls of glass reflecting the sunset in shades of crimson and gold. "Welcome home," Daniel said, his voice a low rumble in the intimate confines of his Bentley. Home. The word sounded foreign to her ears. Just that morning, she'd imagined beginning her married life in James's penthouse, waking up beside the man she thought loved her. Now, as darkness fell, she was entering the home of a virtual stranger, wearing a wedding band he'd somehow produced within hours. The car stopped at the front entrance, where a distinguished older man in a crisp suit stood waiting. "That's Edward," Danielle explained. "He manages the household." Edward opened Emily's door with formal precision. "Welcome, Mrs. Grayson. The staff is assembled to greet you." Emily felt a strange disconnection hearing the name spoken aloud. She'd spent months preparing to become Mrs. Harrington, and now, in the space of a few hours, she had a different identity entirely. Daniel's hand settled at the small of her back as he guided her inside, the heat of his palm penetrating the silk of her gown. She'd changed out of her wedding dress at her parents' insistence into an ivory silk sheath that had been meant for the rehearsal dinner. The irony wasn't lost on her. Inside, a line of staff stood in the soaring entrance hall. A chef, housekeepers, a gardener, a personal assistant, all watching her with barely concealed curiosity. The bride who wasn't supposed to be theirs. "I didn't anticipate bringing home a wife today," Daniel told her quietly as they moved through introductions. "They're as surprised as you are." After the introductions, Edward informed them that dinner was prepared whenever they wished to eat. Daniel thanked him, then led Emily through the house, a tour that revealed as much about the man as the property. Each room was immaculately designed, with museum-quality art and furniture that probably cost more than most houses. Yet the spaces felt unlived in, like perfect sets, waiting for actors to bring them to life. "Your bedroom," Daniel finally said, opening double doors to reveal a suite larger than her entire apartment. The enormous bedroom opened onto a private terrace overlooking the ocean. Inside, a sitting area with butter-soft leather chairs faced a fireplace. The bathroom beyond was an expanse of marble and glass, but it was the bed that drew her eye, a massive 4-poster draped in crisp white linens that gleamed in the lamplight. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "My suite is across the hall." His eyes held hers. "As per our agreement," Emily nodded, relief, and something like disappointment warring within her. The day's emotional whiplash had left her raw, uncertain of her own reactions. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said. "Dinner, in an hour." After he left, Emily stood motionless in the center of the room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below, the whisper of an expensive climate control system. Then the reality of the day crashed over her, and her legs gave way. She sank onto the edge of the bed, tears she'd held back for hours finally breaking free. She'd lost everything familiar in a single day. Her fiancé, her future, her sense of self. In their place stood a beautiful stranger with unknown motives, and a marriage contract that felt more like a business merger than a union of hearts. Yet, when she remembered the moment Daniel had kissed her at the altar, her body responded with a heat that had nothing to do with business arrangements. Dinner was a subdued affair in a dining room with a wall of glass overlooking the moonlit ocean. Daniel had changed into black trousers and a charcoal sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Emily had found her luggage, meant for her honeymoon with James, delivered to her new bedroom. She'd selected a simple black dress, suddenly conscious of dressing for a different man than the one who'd seen her pack these clothes. "Wine," Daniel offered, holding a bottle of what she recognized as an exceptional vintage. "Please." Emily needed something to steady her nerves. They ate in relative silence, the distance between them filled with unasked questions. The food was exquisite. Edward served each course with quiet efficiency before disappearing, leaving them alone again. "You barely touched your food," Daniel observed as Edward cleared their plates. "It's been an unusual day," Emily replied, taking another sip of wine. "I'm not often abandoned at the altar and married to a stranger before dinner." Something like amusement flickered in Daniel's eyes. "No, I imagine not." When Edward had gone, leaving them with coffee and cognac, Daniel studied her across the table. "You should know that James called." Emily's hand froze around her coffee cup. "When?" "While you were getting settled. He heard about our marriage." And the single syllable contained a universe of questions. Daniel's smile was coldly satisfied. He was upset. "What did you tell him?" "That my wife was unavailable to speak with him." The possessiveness in his voice sent an unexpected shiver down Emily's spine. "That she was busy settling into her new home." Emily set down her cup with deliberate care. "I'm not actually your wife in the way he would understand." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes suddenly intense. "Aren't you? We are legally married. You wear my ring. You sleep under my roof. In separate bedrooms." She reminded him. For now, the confidence in his voice both irritated and intrigued her. Emily pushed back her chair. "I think I'll retire early. It's been a long day." Daniel stood as she did, moving around the table with fluid grace. When he reached her, he took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a seemingly casual gesture that sent heat spiraling through her. "I'll escort you to your room." They walked in silence through the quiet house, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. At her door, Emily turned to thank him, but the words died in her throat as she found him watching her with naked hunger. "May I kiss you good night?" he asked, his voice a low growl that vibrated through her. The proper answer was no. Their arrangement was practical, not passionate, yet Emily found herself nodding, drawn to him by something beyond logic or self-spettled. Daniel stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. His thumb traced the curve of her lower lip, the simple touch sending electricity dancing across her skin. When his mouth finally claimed hers, the kiss was nothing like the gentle one they'd shared at the altar. This kiss was possession, demand. His lips moved against hers with practiced skill, coaxing a response she was helpless to deny. When his tongue swept into her mouth, Emily heard herself make a small sound of surrender. His arm locked around her waist, pulling her against the hard planes of his body. Heat bloomed between them, turning her limbs liquid and her thoughts hazy. His hand slid from her face to the nape of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair as he deepened the kiss further, demanding everything. Emily found herself responding with equal fervor, her hands clutching at his shoulders, her body arching into his. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, his eyes stormy with desire. "That," he said roughly, "was not part of our business arrangement." "No," she agreed, her voice unsteady. "It wasn't." He stepped back, creating distance between them with visible effort. "Good night, Emily." She slipped into her room, closing the door behind her, her heart hammering against her ribs. The taste of him lingered on her lips. Cognac, désir, and danger. The storm came at midnight, rolling in from the ocean with theatrical fury. Thunder crashed against the cliffs, lightning, illuminating Emily's unfamiliar bedroom in stark flashes. But it wasn't the storm that woke her. It was the nightmare. In her dream, she stood at the altar again, watching James walk away. But this time, as she reached for Daniel's outstretched hand, he too turned and left her standing alone, abandoned twice, before hundreds of watching eyes. Emily woke with a scream caught in her throat, tangled in silk sheets, damp with her own sweat. Lightning flashes, casting monstrous shadows across the unfamiliar room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then her bedroom door flew open, and Daniel stood silhouetted against the hallway light. He wore only pajama bottoms, his chest bare and his hair tousled from sleep. "Emily." His voice cut through the sound of rain lashing against the windows. "Are you all right?" She tried to answer, but another crack of thunder shook the house, and a sob escaped instead. In 3 long strides, Daniel was beside her bed, sitting on the edge of it, his weight dipping the mattress. "Nightmare?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. Emily nodded, embarrassed by her weakness, yet grateful for his presence. "I'm sorry I woke you." "Don't be." His hand found hers in the darkness, warm and solid. The first night in a strange place is always difficult. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the concern in his eyes. Without thinking, Emily leaned forward, seeking comfort in the most primal way through touch. Daniel's arms came around her immediately, gathering her against his chest. The heat of his bare skin burned through her thin nightgown, but it was a welcome burn, chasing away the chill of her nightmare. "He left me," she whispered against his shoulder, finally voicing the humiliation that had driven her into Daniel's arms in front of everyone without explanation. Daniel's arms tightened around her. "His loss," he murmured into her hair. "My gain." The simple words penetrated her defenses more effectively than elaborate comfort would have. Emily pulled back slightly, looking up at him in the flicker of lightning. The raw hunger in his eyes stole her breath. "Daniel," she whispered, uncertain what she was asking for. He answered anyway. his mouth finding hers with unerring precision. This kiss was different from their earlier ones, deeper, more demanding, with an edge of desperation that matched the storm raging outside. His hands slid down her back, tracing her spine through the silk of her nightgown, leaving trails of fire in their wake. "Tell me to stop," he growled against her mouth. "Tell me this isn't what you want." Emily's answer was to pull him closer, her fingers threading through his hair. Something primitive had awakened in her, a need to feel alive after the emotional devastation of the day. Daniel groaned, a sound of surrender that vibrated through her. In one fluid movement, he pressed her back against the pillows, his body covering hers with delicious weight. His kisses traveled from her mouth to her throat, teeth grazing the sensitive skin there and drawing a gasp from her lips. "Mine," he whispered against her collarbone, the single word filled with dark possessiveness. "Say it, Emily. Say you're Mina. Yours." She whispered back, the word torn from someplace deep inside her that recognized the truth of it. Even as her mind struggled to make sense of what was happening between them, Daniel's hand slid beneath her nightgown, palm hot against her thigh, as it moved higher with torturous slowness. When his fingers finally reached their destination, Emily cried out, arching against him. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice rough with desire. When she met his gaze, something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability at odds with his dominant touch. "I need to see you." In that moment, with the storm raging around them and desire consuming them from within, Emily surrendered completely to the flames that had been smoldering between them since that first kiss at the altar. What began as comfort transformed into passion of a different kind. Raf, desperate, consuming. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word of possession drove them higher until they crashed together, finding release in each other's arms as lightning split the sky outside. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, breath gradually slowing, Daniel's arms remained tight around her, as though afraid she might disappear. The possessiveness of his embrace should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like shelter after a lifetime of storms. "Stay," Emily whispered when she felt him begin to withdraw, both physically and emotionally. Surprise flickered across his features, quickly masked. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said simply, though nothing about what had happened between them was simple. As Daniel settled beside her, gathering her against his chest, Emily felt herself sliding into sleep. Exhaustion ourselves. Her last conscious thought was that while their marriage might have begun as a business arrangement, it had just crossed a line that neither of them had anticipated or was prepared for. Chapter 4. Beautiful Surrender. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the tangled sheets. Emily awoke slowly, her body pleasantly sore in unfamiliar ways. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day crashed over her. James's abandonment, Daniel's unexpected proposal, their impulsive marriage, and the night that had followed. She turned her head to find the space beside her empty, the sheets cool to the touch. Daniel had left some time while she slept. The realization brought a strange pang of disappointment, quickly dismissed. What had she expected? Declarations of devotion from a man who had married her primarily to spite his business rival. Emily sat up, pulling the sheet around her naked body. On the nightstand lay a folded note, her new name written across it in bold, masculine script. "Emily, I had early meetings that couldn't be postponed. Edward will show you around the property and help you with anything you need. My driver is at your disposal. Dinasu." Daniel. No mention of what had happened between them, no acknowledgement of the boundaries that had been crossed, just practical information delivered with cool efficiency. Emily's cheeks burned with sudden embarrassment. She had given herself to this man with abandon, crying out his name as pleasure overwhelmed her. Yet his note read like something he might leave for a house guest. She showered in the cavernous marble bathroom, letting hot water sluice away the physical evidence of the night's passion. As steam billowed around her, Emily attempted to make sense of her conflicting emotions. Humiliation over James's abandonment, warred with anger at his betrayal. Relief at escaping public pity, competed with uncertainty about her impulsive decision to marry Daniel, and beneath it all ran a current of uncomfortable arousal at the memory of Daniel's hands on her body, his mouth claiming hers with possessive hunger. After dressing in casual clothing from her honeymoon luggage, Emily ventured downstairs. Edward appeared immediately, as though he'd been waiting for her. "Good morning, Mrs. Grayson. Would you care for breakfast on the terrace? The weather is quite pleasant this morning." "That would be lovely. Thank you." Emily followed him through the house, noticing details she'd missed in the emotional turmoil of the previous evening. The museum-quality art, the subtle evidence of wealth in every perfect detail. The terrace overlooked the ocean, waves glittering in the morning sunlight. A table had been set with fine china and crystal, fresh flowers arranged in a simple ceramic vase. "Mr. Grayson mentioned you prefer fruit and yogurt in the mornings." Edward said as he pulled out her chair, "but the chef can prepare anything you wish." Emily frowned slightly. "How would Daniel know my breakfast preferences?" Edward's expression remained professionally neutral. "I couldn't say, Madam," as she ate. Emily contemplated the strangeness of her situation. She had married a man who apparently knew details about her that she hadn't shared, yet she knew almost nothing about him beyond his reputation in business circles. After breakfast, Edward gave her a tour of the property. 12 acres of manicured grounds leading to a private beach, a pool complex that rivaled luxury resorts, gardens designed by a famous landscape architect. The mansion itself contained amenities Emily had only seen in magazines: a home theater, gym, wine cellar, library with floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes. "And this," Edward said, opening a door on the ground floor, "is Mr. Grayson's office. He asked that I show you in case you need to use the facilities." The space was large but surprisingly warm, with rich wood paneling and comfortable leather furniture. A massive desk overlooked the ocean through wall-to-wall windows. Bookshelves lined one wall, while another displayed framed photographs, the only personal touches Emily had seen in the entire house. She moved closer, drawn by curiosity about the man she had married. Most photos showed Daniel in professional settings accepting awards, shaking hands with recognizable business leaders and politicians. But one frame held a faded photograph of a dark-haired woman holding a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. The resemblance was unmistakable. The woman was Daniel's mother, and the serious child was Daniel himself. Emily's fingers hovered over the photograph, not quite touching the glass. "That was taken at their lake house in Maine," Edward said quietly, his voice startling her. She hadn't heard him enter. Before she fell ill, Emily turned to find the butler watching her with an unreadable expression. For a moment, she glimpsed something beyond his professional mask. A protective fondness for Daniel that suggested their relationship transcended employer and employee. "You've known him a long time," she observed. Edward straightened almost imperceptibly. "Since he was 12, Madam. I served his father's household first." His tone shifted subtly, closing the brief window of personal revelation. "Will you be requiring anything else this afternoon?" The deliberate change of subject told Emily more than words could about painful history best left undisturbed, at least by anyone but Daniel himself. The evasion spoke volumes. Emily turned back to the photographs, noticing now what was missing. Any sign of family beyond that single childhood photo. No parents at graduation, no siblings at professional milestones. Just Daniel, always impeccably dressed, always slightly apart, even when surrounded by others. Like her, he was alone. By evening, Emily had explored the mansion thoroughly and spent several hours on the private beach, letting the sun and salt air soothe her tumultuous thoughts. She returned to her room to prepare for dinner, standing before the closet of clothes meant for her honeymoon with James. The irony wasn't lost on her. She selected a simple black dress with a neckline that revealed more skin than she typically displayed. The choice was deliberate, to attest to see if the night they'd shared had meant anything to Daniel beyond physical release. At precisely 7, Emily descended the sweeping staircase to find Daniel waiting in the entrance hall. He wore a tailored suit that emphasized his athletic build, his silver blue eyes tracking her descent with an intensity that sent heat coiling through her. "You look beautiful," he said, the simple compliment delivered in a voice that had roughened slightly. "Thank you." Emily kept her tone neutral. Though her pulse had quickened at the naked appreciation in his gaze, he extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her fingers in his. The simple contact sent electricity dancing up her arm. Daniel's thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture that seemed unconscious yet intimate. "I thought we'd dine in town tonight," he said, leading her outside, where a sleek black car waited. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." The restaurant was exclusive, hidden behind an unmarked door on a quiet street. Inside, sophistication whispered from every detail. Muted lighting, impeccable service, discreet spaces between tables, ensuring privacy. Daniel guided her with a hand at the small of her back, the heat of his palm burning through the thin fabric of her dress. They were shown to a private room where a woman waited, rising as they entered. "Emily," Daniel said, "this is my sister, Olivia." Emily couldn't hide her surprise. In all the gossip she'd heard about Daniel Grayson over the years, there had never been mention of a sister. Olivia was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, with the same silver blue eyes as her brother, but softer features. She assessed Emily with undisguised curiosity. "So, you're the woman who's accomplished what half of Atlanta's socialites have failed to do," Olivia said, taking Emily's hand. "Captured my brother." "It's not quite," Emily began, but Daniel interrupted smoothly. "A whirlwind romance," he said, his hand settling possessively at Emily's waist. "When you know, You know, Olivia's eyebrow arched in obvious skepticism, but she didn't challenge his description. Throughout dinner, Emily felt herself being subtly evaluated by the woman who was apparently Daniel's only family. Olivia asked pointed questions about Emily's work at the Thompson Foundation, her education, her family, all delivered with razor-sharp intelligence beneath a veneer of social pleasantry. "You'll have to excuse my sister's interrogation," Daniel said as Olivia excused herself to take a phone call. "She's protective." "I don't mind," Emily replied truthfully. "It's actually reassuring to know you have someone who cares about you." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Vulnerability. Quickly masked. "Olivia and I only had each other growing up. Our father was absent in the ways that mattered. It was the first personal information he had volunteered, and Emily recognized the significance of it. Thank you for introducing me to her. I know this isn't." She hesitated, unsure how to classify what existed between them. "Real," Daniel finished, his voice dropping to a low intensity that made her shiver. His hand found hers beneath the table, fingers intertwining with deliberate intimacy. "Last night felt very real to me." Heat bloomed in Emily's cheeks at the reference to their passionate encounter. Before she could respond, Olivia returned, her sharp gaze noting their clasped hands with interest. "Well, brother," she said as she retook her seat, "I approve, which I'm sure comes as a great shock to you both." Daniel's smile held genuine warmth. "Your opinion always matters." Olivia. When they left the restaurant hours later, Emily felt slightly disoriented. The evening had been pleasant, almost normal, as though they truly were newlyweds, introducing family to a new spouse. Daniel's behavior had been attentive, his hand rarely leaving contact with some part of her, fingers brushing her arm, palm at the small of her back, knee pressed against hers beneath the table. In the car returning home, silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken questions. When Daniel's hand settled on her knee, thumb tracing small circles against the silk of her dress, Emily felt her breath catch. "Did I pass inspection?" she asked, aiming for lightness to mask her body's response to his touch. Daniel's eyes remained on the darkness beyond the car window. "Olivia doesn't approve of many people. The fact that she likes you speaks volumes." "About what?" His hand slid higher on her thigh, fingers tracing patterns that sent heat spiraling through her. "About your character, your strength." His eyes finally met hers, midnight blue in the dim interior of the car. "She recognized what I saw in you at the altar." "And what was that?" Emily's voice had dropped to a whisper, her body responding to his touch with embarrassing readiness. Someone who wouldn't break, even when the world was watching her fall apart. His hand continued its upward journey, disappearing beneath the hem of her dress. Someone worth claiming. Emily's head fell back against the leather seat as his fingers found her center, easing through delicate fabric with deliberate skill. "Daniel," she gasped. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, leaning closer, his breath warm against her neck. Instead, Emily found herself parting her legs slightly, granting him better access. A soft sound of surrender escaped her as his thumb found the sensitive bundle of nerves through the thin barrier of her underwear. "Not here," she managed, though her body was already responding to his touch. "Here," he countered, his voice a dark command against her ear. "I've been thinking about touching you like this all day." The privacy partition between them and the driver was closed, the car's windows tinted to opacity. There was no risk of discovery. Yet the semi-public nature of the act added a forbidden thrill that heightened Emily's arousal. When his fingers slipped beneath the fabric barrier, finding her already wet for him, Daniel growled with satisfaction. "You've been thinking about me, too." It wasn't a question, but Emily answered anyway, her voice breaking as his fingers began a rhythm designed to drive her mad. "Yes, say my name," he demanded, his mouth hot against her throat. "Daniel," she gasped, as pleasure built with each skilled touch. "Please, please what?" His teeth grazed her earlobe, sending shockwaves of sensation down her spine. "Don't stop," Emily whispered, abandoning dignity in the face of mounting need. Daniel's free hand tangled in her hair, turning her face toward his. "Look at me," he commanded. "I want to watch you fall apart for me." His eyes held hers as his fingers drove her higher, their intensity more intimate than the physical act itself. When release finally claimed her, Emily cried out his name, her body shuddering with waves of pleasure. Daniel captured the sound with his mouth, kissing her deeply as she came down from the peak, his fingers gentling but not withdrawing completely. "Beautiful," he murmured against her lips. "So beautiful when you surrender." Emily felt herself flush with mingled embarrassment and lingering pleasure. She had just climaxed in the back of a car at the hands of a man she barely knew, a man who was now legally her husband, a man whose touch seemed to bypass all her carefully constructed defenses. When they arrived home, Daniel helped her from the car, his hand at the small of her back as they entered the house. In the entrance hall, Emily hesitated, Uncertain whether to return to her own room or acknowledge the shift in their relationship, Daniel made the decision for her, scooping her into his arms with effortless strength. "My room tonight," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Emily should have objected to his high-handedness. Instead, she found herself wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her up the stairs. "Is this how you treat all your business arrangements?" she asked, aiming for sarcasm but achieving only breathlessness. Daniel's laugh was low and surprisingly genuine. "Only the ones who scream my name when they come." Heat flooded Emily's cheeks, but before she could respond, they had reached his bedroom. Unlike her suite, which was decorated in cool neutrals, Daniel's room reflected his personality. Deep blues, rich woods, masculine without being austere. The centerpiece was an enormous bed with navy linens that looked sinfully inviting. He set her on her feet beside it, his hands moving to the zipper of her dress. "I've been wanting to take this off you all evening," he admitted, slowly drawing the zipper down her back. "Though I appreciate the view it provided," the dress slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet in a whisper of expensive fabric. Daniel stepped back, his eyes darkening as they traveled over her body, clad now only in black lace underwear. "Perfect," he murmured, and there was something in his voice, reverence mingled with hunger, that made Emily feel truly beautiful for the first time in her life. She reached for him, fingers working at his tie, then the buttons of his shirt. "Your turn." Daniel allowed her to undress him, standing perfectly still as she revealed his body, inch by inch. When her hands reached his belt, he caught her wrists, his eyes burning into hers. "Are you sure about this? There's no going back if we continue." The question surprised her, revealing a consideration she hadn't expected from him. "I think we crossed that line last night," she said softly. "Last night was comfort in the storm," Daniel replied, his thumbs tracing circles on the sensitive skin of her inner wrists. Tonight would be a choice. Emily studied him in the lamplight, this complex, dangerous man who had appeared at the moment of her greatest humiliation to offer salvation wrapped in revenge. A man whose touch set her body on fire, a man who remained largely a mystery. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm sure." Something shifted in Daniel's expression: triumph, perhaps, or relief. He released her wrists, allowing her to finish undressing him. When they were both naked, he lifted her onto the bed with gentle strength, following her down, his body covering hers. This time, their lovemaking was different, slower, more deliberate. Each touch infused with exploration rather than desperate need. Daniel took his time, learning her body with meticulous attention, discovering what made her gasp, what drew out small whimpers of pleasure, what caused her to arch against him in wordless demand. When he finally entered her, his eyes locked with hers, refusing to let her hide from the intensity of the connection forming between them. "Mine," he whispered against her lips, as he began to move within her. "Say it, Emily." "Yours," she answered, the word torn from some place deep inside her that recognized its truth. Even as her mind struggled to make sense of what was happening between them, their bodies moved together with increasing urgency, finding a rhythm that drove them both toward the edge. When release came, it crashed over them simultaneously, Daniel's name on Emily's lips as she shattered around him. Afterward, as their breathing slowed and heartbeats gradually returned to normal, Daniel gathered her against his chest, his arms tight around her as though afraid she might slip away. The possessiveness of his embrace should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like something she'd been searching for without knowing it. "Safety, belonging, home, stay," he said. The words, somewhere between command and plea. Emily looked up at him, studying the harsh angles of his face, now softened in the aftermath of passion. "Are you asking or telling?" A corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been amusement. "Would it matter?" "Yes," she said simply. "It would." Daniel's expression sobered. "Then I'm asking, stay with me tonight." Emily, the vulnerability in his voice touched something deep inside her. This man, who controlled vast business interests with ruthless precision, who had married her partly for revenge against his enemy, was asking rather than demanding. "Yes," she whispered, settling her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I'll stay." As sleep claimed her, Emily realized that somewhere between abandonment at the altar and this moment of unexpected tenderness, she had begun to surrender not just her body to Daniel Grayson, but something far more dangerous, her heart, and that was a vulnerability neither of them had bargained for in their marriage of convenience. Chapter 5. Haunted Hearts. 2 weeks into their marriage, Emily had settled into a routine in Daniel's life. By day, she returned to her work at the Thompson Foundation, immersing herself in familiar responsibilities that provided an anchor amid the chaos her personal life had become. By night, And she returned to Daniel's mansion. Their mansion now, and to his bed. Where passion consistently overwhelmed reason, they rarely spoke of the arrangement that had brought them together. The marriage that had begun as a business transaction had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a relationship built on physical compatibility and growing emotional connection that neither was willing to name. Tonight, Emily arrived home later than usual after a foundation event. The house was quiet, the staff gone for the evening. She found Daniel in his study, a tumbler of scotch in his hand as he stared out at the moonlit ocean. "You're late," he said without turning around, his voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite identify. "Foundation fundraiser," Emily explained, setting down her purse. "I texted you." Daniel turned then, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "James was there." Emily froze, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. "Yes, he's on the board. Did he speak to you?" The casual question couldn't disguise the tension in Daniel's shoulders. "He tried." Emily moved closer, sensing dangerous territory. "I kept our interaction brief and professional." Daniel's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of his displeasure. "And how did that feel? Seeing the man who left you at the altar, surprisingly empty?" Emily answered truthfully, like looking at a stranger. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, satisfaction, perhaps, or relief. He set down his glass and crossed to her, one hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "Good," he murmured before claiming her mouth in a kiss that quickly turned, demanding, "Later." Tangled in the sheets of their bed, Emily studied Daniel's face in the moonlight filtering through the windows. In sleep, the hard edges of his expression softened, revealing glimpses of the boy he must have been before life hardened him. She was beginning to piece together fragments of his past details gleaned from Olivia, from Edward's occasional slips, from Daniel's own rare moments of openness, his mother's early death, his father's emotional and often physical absence, the family business lost through what Olivia had cryptically called betrayal. As if sensing her scrutiny, Daniel stirred, his face suddenly contorting in distress. "No," he murmured, still caught in whatever dream held him. "Don't go, please." Emily placed a gentle hand on his chest. "Daniel, wake up." His eyes flew open, disoriented and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. For a heartbeat, he stared at her without recognition. Then awareness returned, along with his carefully constructed walls. "You were dreaming," Emily said softly. Daniel sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Did I say anything?" The defensive note in his voice made Emily choose her words carefully. "You asked someone not to go." Something raw and painful flashed across his face before he could mask it. He threw back the covers and strode naked to the window, his body silhouetted against the moonlight. "Daniel," Emily said gently, "talk to me." "There's nothing to talk about." His voice had the practiced neutrality she'd come to recognize as his defense against vulnerability. Emily slipped from the bed, wrapping the sheet around her as she approached him. "I think there is." For a long moment, he remained silent, staring out at the darkness beyond the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an undercurrent of old pain. Daniel's hands gripped the window frame, knuckles white with tension. When he finally spoke, each word seemed physically painful to release. "My mother," he faltered, the vulnerability in his voice so unlike his usual controlled demeanor that Emily felt her heart constrict. "She fought cancer for 2 years before she died. I was 7. Watching her fade day by day, listening to her promise she'd never leave me." Even as she slipped away, his shoulders trembled almost imperceptibly beneath Emily's touch. She remained silent, instinctively understanding that interrupting might cause him to rebuild his walls. My father couldn't bear it. He remained physically present but emotionally vanished. The company became his refuge. Then alcohol when the company failed. Daniel's reflection in the glass showed a glimpse of the abandoned child he'd once been. By 15, I was essentially alone. By 17, he turned to face her, his eyes containing a raw pain he'd likely never shown another soul. I found him in his study, the gun still in his hand. He left a note, apologizing to his business partners, but not a word for me. Not one word. The stark confession hung between them. Emily's arms slipped around his waist, her cheek pressing against his back. She felt the shudder that ran through him at her touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Inadequate words for such profound loss. "I don't want your pity," Daniel said, though he made no move to pull away from her embrace. "It's not pity to care about someone's pain." The simple statement seemed to catch him off guard. He turned in her arms, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Is that what you do, Emily? Care about my pain?" The question carried layers of meaning, probing at the undefined boundaries of their relationship. Emily met his gaze steadily. "Yes," she answered simply, "I do." Something shifted in Daniel's expression. vulnerability giving way to a hunger that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with emotional starvation. His kiss, when it came, was different from the ones they'd shared before, deeper, to more disparate, as though he was trying to consume not just her body but her very essence. Emily responded with equal fervor, understanding instinctively that he needed this connection, this proof that she wouldn't disappear like everyone else he'd loved. Their lovemaking that night transcended the physical, each touch, each whispered word, carried emotional weight. Neither had been prepared to acknowledge before. When release finally claimed them, Daniel buried his face against her neck, his body shuddering not just with pleasure but with the aftershocks of emotional barriers breaking. "Emily," he whispered against her skin, her name a confession and a prayer. As dawn painted the sky in delicate pastels, they lay facing each other, physically and emotionally naked, in a way they hadn't been before. Daniel traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You know why I was at your wedding?" he said quietly. "But I never told you why." Emily remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "James Harrington's father was my father's business partner. They built Grayson Harrington Financial together." His jaw tightened. "Then Charles Harrington orchestrated a hostile takeover, pushing my father out of the company they'd created. The scandal, the financial ruin. It broke him." Understanding dawned. "So your interest in me began as part of your revenge against James," Daniel admitted, his eyes holding hers. "I wanted to take something precious from him. The way his father took everything from mine." The confession should have angered her, confirmed her worst fears about his motives. Instead, Emily found herself reaching for him, her palm resting against his cheek. "And now?" she asked, the question laden with significance. Daniel turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. "Now I find myself in the unexpected position of caring more about you than about revenge." The admission, offered in the vulnerable space between night and morning, hung between them the first acknowledgement that their arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated. "I should hate you for using me," Emily said softly, "for making me part of your revenge plot." "Yes," Daniel agreed, his hand covering hers. "You should, but I don't." The realization surprised her, even as she spoke it aloud. "God help me, I don't." Morning light spilled across the bed as Daniel gathered her closer, his arms tightening around her as though afraid she might vanish if he loosened his grip. "Stay with me," he whispered against her hair. Emily closed her eyes, knowing he wasn't just asking her to remain in his bed for the morning. He was asking for something more profound, a commitment that went beyond their original arrangement. "I'm here," she answered simply, feeling him exhale against her. Tension, leaving his body at her words. As they drifted back to sleep in the growing light of a new day, Emily realized that the haunted hearts that had brought them together in desperation were now binding them together in something dangerously close to love. Chapter 6. Possession. 1 month into their marriage, Emily stood before the full-length mirror in their bedroom, studying her reflection with critical eyes. The emerald gown she'd chosen for tonight's charity gala hugged her curves before flaring dramatically at the knee. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, diamonds glittering at her throat, and ears wedding gifts from Daniel that had appeared without ceremony the week after their impulsive marriage. "You're staring at yourself as though looking for flaws," Daniel observed from the doorway. "You won't find any." Emily turned to face him, her breath catching at the sight of him in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. Despite weeks of waking beside him, despite knowing every inch of his body intimately, the sheer masculine beauty of him still had the power to steal her breath. "It's not vanity," she explained. "I'm preparing myself." Daniel crossed to her, his hands settling at her waist with casual possession. "For tonight will be my first public appearance, since she didn't need to finish the sentence, since being abandoned at the altar, since marrying you instead." Understanding flashed in Daniel's eyes. "You're worried about facing the gossip. I'm worried about facing James," she admitted. "He'll be there with Sophia." A dangerous light kindled in Daniel's gaze. "Good." Emily frowned. "How is that good?" Daniel's fingers traced the bare skin of her shoulders, leaving trails of fire in their wake. "Because tonight, everyone will see exactly who you belong to now." The possessiveness in his voice should have offended her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly. Over the past weeks, she had discovered unsettling truths about herself. How she responded to Daniel's dominance. How his possessive nature awakened something primal within her. "Is that what I am?" she asked, her voice dropping lower. "A possession." Daniel's hand slid up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her lower lip, in a gesture that had become familiar, yet still sent shivers down her spine. "You are my wife," he said simply, "my partner, my equal." His eyes darkened as he leaned closer. "And yes, Mine." His kiss was gentle despite the possessive words, mindful of her makeup. Still, Emily felt herself responding with embarrassing readiness. her body arching into his touch. "We'll be late," she murmured against his mouth. "Let them wait," Daniel growled, but he released her with obvious reluctance. "Tonight is about showing the world that Emily Grayson is a force to be reckoned with." Emily smiled at his use of her new name. The transition from Thompson to Grayson had been surprisingly seamless, as though she'd been waiting to shed her old identity. "Then let's not keep them waiting," she said, drawing strength from his confidence in her. The Atlanta Symphony Hall glittered with lights, and the city's wealthiest residents in their finest attire. As Emily and Daniel made their entrance, she was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them, the sidelong glances, the speculation. Daniel's hand rested at the small of her back, warm and steadying. "Ignore them," he murmured for her ears alone. "They're merely background noise." The Thompson Foundation's annual gala was the social event of the season, bringing together Atlanta's elite to raise money for educational initiatives in underserved communities. As the daughter of the foundation's founder, Emily had always played a central role. This year, however, her sudden marriage had added an unprecedented layer of drama to the proceedings. "Darling," Emily's mother appeared before them, elegant, in midnight blue silk, her smile brittle with strain. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it." "Mother," Emily accepted her kiss on both cheeks. "The foundation is too important." Helen Thompson's gaze flickered to Daniel, weariness evident in her expression. Despite weekly lunches with her daughter, she remained unconvinced about Emily's hasty household. "Mr. Grayson," she acknowledged with cool politeness, "I understand you've made a substantial donation." Daniel inclined his head slightly. "The foundation's work is exceptional. And please call me Daniel. We are family now." The reminder of their connection seemed to discomfort Helen further, but she was too well-bred to show it openly. "Of course. Please enjoy the evening." As she moved away to greet other guests, Emily felt Daniel's arm tighten around her waist. "Your mother still disapproves of me. She's protective," Emily explained, "and concerned about my judgment." After she trailed off, unwilling to reference James again. "After you married a man with my reputation," Daniel finished, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I can hardly blame her." Before Emily could respond, she felt Daniel tense beside her. Following his gaze across the crowded ballroom, she saw them, James and Sophia, standing by the champagne fountain. James was as handsome as ever in his tuxedo, his golden hair gleaming under the chandeliers. Sophia hung on his arm, resplendent in a red gown that seemed designed to draw every eye. When James's gaze found Emily's across the room, something flared in his expression. Regret, perhaps, or simple possessiveness for what was no longer his. "Shall we say hello?" Daniel suggested, his voice deceptively casual. "That's not necessary," Emily began, but Daniel was already guiding her forward, his hand firm at her waist. James straightened as they approached, his easy smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Emily, you look radiant." "Thank you." Emily was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, the absence of pain at seeing the man who had so publicly humiliated her. "James." "Sophia, you remember my husband, Daniel Grayson." Sophia's smile faltered at Emily's deliberate emphasis on husband. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he extended his hand to Daniel. "Grayson, quite the coup you managed at my wedding." Daniel's answering smile held a predatory edge. "Not a coup. Harrington. A risque." His arm slid around Emily's waist, drawing her closer to his side. Some men don't recognize value until they've thrown it away. The tension between them crackled testosterone and rivalry, made manifest. Emily placed a restraining hand on Daniel's chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. "If you'll excuse us," she said smoothly, "we should greet the other guests." As they moved away, Emily felt James's eyes following them. "That was unnecessary," she murmured to Daniel. "No," Daniel countered, his voice low, with barely suppressed emotion. "It was absolutely necessary." Before she could question him further, they were surrounded by Foundation board members, business associates, and the curious society matrons who ruled Atlanta's social scene. Throughout the evening, Daniel orbited her like a planet tethered to its sun, his gravitational pull evident in every interaction. While he maintained professional decorum, the electricity between them was undeniable. A subtle touch at her elbow guiding her through conversations, his knee briefly pressing against hers during dinner, the brush of his thumb across her knuckles when passing a champagne flute, where once she might have found such attention stifling. Emily now recognized something deeper in his watchfulness, not ownership but protection, not control but partnership. The realization unsettled her. When had his possessiveness transformed from something to resist into something that felt like belonging? It was during the dancing portion of the evening that James approached again, timing his move when Daniel had stepped away briefly to speak with a business associate. "May I have this dance?" James asked, his voice carrying the practiced charm that had once made Emily's heart race. For old time's sake, before she could frame a polite refusal, Daniel appeared at her side, his expression cold. "My wife has promised all her dances to me tonight." James's smile turned challenging. "Surely you can spare one dance." "Grayson, Emily and I have history." "After all, Emily corrected quietly but firmly. "We had history." "James." Something like genuine regret flashed across James's handsome features. "Emily, if I could just explain." "That won't be necessary," Daniel interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. "The time for explanations was before you left her standing at the altar, not after she's become my wife." Without warning, Daniel pulled Emily into his arms, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that was pure possession. His hand splayed possessively across her lower back, holding her against the hard planes of his body as his tongue swept into her mouth with devastating skill. When he finally released her, Emily was breathless, her lips tingling, her body flushed with heat. Around them, conversation had faltered as guests watched the display with undisguised interest. James stood frozen, his expression a complex mixture of anger and loss. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Sophia to hurry after him. That, Emily said once she'd regained her composure, was caveman behavior. A corner of Daniel's mouth lifted in that half-smile she'd come to find so appealing. "You didn't seem to mind." She hadn't, which was perhaps the most disturbing realization of all. Something primitive within her had responded to his claiming, to the public declaration of possession. "Take me home," she whispered, her voice husky with desire. Now, Daniel's eyes darkened at her tone, at the naked want she knew was visible in her expression. Without a word, he guided her toward the exit, stopping only to make their excuses to her parents. The drive home was charged with electric tension, Daniel's hand resting high on her thigh, his thumb tracing circles that sent heat spiraling through her. The moment they were inside the privacy of their home, he backed her against the wall, his mouth hot and demanding on hers. "Mine." He growled against her throat as his hands gathered the silk of her gown, drawing it up her thighs. "Say it, Emily. Yours." She gasped as his fingers found her center, already wet for him. "Only yours." Their lovemaking that night held a new intensity, possession and surrender, braided together into something that transcended physical pleasure. With each thrust, each cry, each whispered endearment, Emily felt herself being marked in ways that went beyond the physical. Later, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Daniel's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare skin. "I meant what I said tonight," he murmured. "You belong with me now." Emily raised herself on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight filtering through the windows. Possession goes both ways. "Daniel," she placed her palm over his heart, feeling its strong, steady beat beneath her hand. "If I'm yours, then you're mine as well." Something vulnerable flashed in his eyes before he pulled her down for a kiss that was surprisingly tender. "Yes," he admitted against her lips. "God help me, I am entirely yours." The confession, offered in the intimate darkness of their bedroom, settled into Emily's heart like a key, turning in a lock. What had begun as a marriage of convenience, as revenge against a mutual enemy, had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Something dangerously close to love. Chapter 7. Betrayal's Shadow. Emily's executive assistant knocked softly before entering her office at the Thompson Foundation. "Mrs. Grayson." This was hand-delivered a few minutes ago. The messenger insisted it was urgent. She placed a thick manila envelope on Emily's desk, concern evident in her expression. "He seemed unusual. I asked for identification, but he claimed it was a confidential legal matter." Emily frowned. "Thank you, Lauren. It's probably just documents from Daniel's attorney." Alone again, Emily examined the envelope. "No return address. No courier service logo. Just her name printed in a generic font. Something about it raised the fine hairs on her neck, an instinctive warning that whatever it contained wasn't routine legal paperwork. She sliced it open carefully. As she tilted the envelope, photographs slid across her polished desk like playing cards, dealt by a malicious hand. Emily's breath caught as her brain processed what her eyes were seeing. Herself, going about her daily life in the weeks before her wedding to James, leaving her apartment, shopping, meeting friends for lunch, working late at the foundation and in the background of several images. A familiar figure, Daniel, watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable. The timestamps showed dates going back months before her wedding day. With trembling hands, Emily shuffled through the photos, her stomach twisting with each new revelation. Daniel at a cafe across from her favorite lunch spot. Daniel in a car parked outside her apartment building. Daniel having drinks in the bar of the hotel where she'd attended a charity function. The final photo was the most damning. Daniel and James locked in what appeared to be a heated conversation outside James's office building. the date stamp showing 3 weeks before her wedding. Emily sat back, the blood rushing in her ears as implications crystallized with devastating clarity. Daniel's appearance at her wedding hadn't been coincidence or impulse. He'd been watching her, tracking her, perhaps even orchestrating events from behind the scenes. The question was why. The accompanying note offered no answers, just a typed message. Ask your husband about his obsession with you. Ask him how long he's been planning to use you. Emily slipped the photos back into the envelope with numb fingers. She needed answers, but first, she needed to think. The foundation offices suddenly felt stifling, the walls closing in as her mind raced with terrible possibilities. She called her assistant, announced she was taking the rest of the day off, and drove not home to the mansion she shared with Daniel, but to the beach, a secluded cove several miles from their property, where she sometimes went to clear her head. The ocean stretched before her, vast and indifferent to human concerns. Emily walked along the shoreline, the envelope clutched in her hand, trying to make sense of the evidence it contained. Daniel had admitted using her as part of his revenge against James. That much she'd already accepted. But these photos suggested something more calculated, more obsessive than he'd revealed. They suggested a man who had been stalking her for months before their paths officially crossed. The realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. She'd given herself to this man body, heart, increasingly soul. She'd begun to trust him, to care for him. Despite the unconventional beginning of their relationship, had it all been manipulation, a long game designed to hurt James at her expense. The sun was setting when Emily finally returned home, emotional exhaustion weighing her steps as she entered the mansion. She found Daniel in his home office, focused on his laptop, his jacket discarded and shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked up at her entrance, a smile warming his features before he registered her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. Immediately alert, Emily tossed the envelope onto his desk. "Explain these." Daniel opened the envelope, his face betraying nothing as he examined the photographs one by one. Only a muscle ticking in his jaw revealed his tension. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "They were delivered to my office this morning." Emily crossed her arms, fighting to keep her voice steady. "No return address." Daniel laid the photos down, his silver blue eyes meeting hers directly. "James sent them. That's your explanation." Emily's voice rose despite her efforts at control. "Not these are fake or this isn't what it looks like. Just James sent them." "They're not fake," Daniel admitted, standing to face her. "And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by claiming otherwise." The confirmation hit Emily like a physical blow. She'd held onto a sliver of hope that there would be an innocent explanation. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "How long have you been watching me?" Daniel's hesitation was brief but telling. 6 months. 6. Emily struggled to process the timeline. "That's before James and I were even engaged." "Yes." Daniel moved from behind his desk, but Emily stepped back, maintaining distance between them. "Why?" she demanded. "What possible reason could you have for stalking me for 6 months?" Daniel's expression darkened at the accusation. "I wasn't stalking you. I was investigating you." "Semantics," Emily spat. "You were watching me without my knowledge or consent." "Yes," he acknowledged, unflinching in the face of her anger. "I was." "Why?" Emily repeated, desperately needing to understand. Daniel's jaw worked as though he was physically struggling with his response. "I told you James's father destroyed my family's company. What I didn't tell you was that I've spent the last decade systematically dismantling the Harrington empire from the shadows, piece by piece." His eyes held hers, cold now with remembered pain. "James was the final target, and you were what? Collateral damage." "No." Daniel stepped forward, and this time Emily held her ground. "You were leverage, or at least, you were supposed to be." "Leverage." Emily repeated the word, bitter on her tongue. "So, our marriage really was just part of your revenge plan." "Initially, yes," Daniel admitted. "When you became engaged to James, I saw an opportunity. I began investigating you, looking for weaknesses, for ways to use you against him." The clinical detachment in his voice sent ice through Emily's veins. "And what did you find in your investigation? What weakness did you discover that made me useful to your plans?" Something shifted in Daniel's expression, vulnerability breaking through his controlled facade. "I found a woman of extraordinary strength and intelligence. A woman who deserved better than James Harrington." "Don't," Emily warned, hearing the dangerous softening in his voice. "Don't try to manipulate me again." Daniel's hand shot out, catching her wrist as she turned to leave. "It's not manipulation." "Emily." "Yes. I began watching you as part of my plan against James, but what I didn't expect was to find myself." He hesitated, as though the words were foreign to him. "Drawn to you, intrigued by you, obsessed with you." Obsessed, Emily corrected, pulling her wrist from his grasp. What was the plan? Daniel. To seduce me away from James before the wedding, to gather information you could use against him. Daniel's silence was confirmation enough, but that's not what happened. Emily continued, pieces falling into terrible place. He beat you to the punch by leaving me at the altar. So you improvised, didn't you? Saw an opportunity to take what was his in the most public, humiliating way possible. It wasn't like that. Daniel insisted, a rare note of desperation in his voice. Then what was it like? Emily challenged. Explain to me how watching me for months, how manipulating your way into my life. My bed wasn't calculated and cold. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd rarely seen from him. The surveillance was calculated, he admitted. The initial interest was strategic, but what happened at the altar, that wasn't planned. You expect me to believe that after seeing these, Emily gestured to the photographs spread across his desk. I had no intention of approaching you that day. Daniel insisted. I came to watch James's triumph, to catalog his happiness, so I could use the memory against him later, when I finally destroyed him completely. His honesty, brutal as it was, gave Emily pause, but then he left you standing there. Daniel continued, his voice dropping lower, and you didn't break. You didn't collapse. You stood there with such dignity, such strength. He trailed off, his expression raw with remembered emotion. Something in me responded to that strength. Before I knew what I was doing, I was walking toward you. Emily wanted to disbelieve him, to dismiss his words as more manipulation, but she remembered the genuine surprise in his eyes when she'd accepted his impulsive proposal, the unguarded moment when he'd whispered against her lips at the altar. The marriage might have begun as opportunity, Daniel said softly, but what happened between us after, that wasn't planned or calculated, that was real. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. How can I believe anything was real between us? How can I trust a single word you say? Daniel stepped closer, his eyes holding hers with fierce intensity. Because I've never lied to you about my feelings, about what happens between us in the dark, about how you've changed me. Changed you, Emily repeated skeptically. From revenge-obsessed stalker to loving husband in just a few weeks. That's kind of transformation. Daniel, anger flashed in his eyes, quickly mastered. I never claimed to be transformed. I'm still the same man who spent a decade planning James's destruction. The same man who used underhanded methods to gather information. The same man who married you, partly out of spite. His brutal honesty was more effective than any emotional plea would have been. But I am also a man who has found himself caring for you beyond all reason or expectation. He continued, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. A man who wakes each morning grateful that you're beside him. A man who, for the first time in his adult life, is considering a future defined by something other than revenge. Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe this, Daniel said, closing the distance between them. His hands framed her face with surprising gentleness. What began as strategy has become the most real thing in my life. You have become the most real thing in my life. The sincerity in his voice was painful to hear. Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the connection that had grown between them over the past weeks. But the photographs were damning evidence of deception stretching back months before their paths had supposedly crossed. I need time, she said finally, stepping away from his touch. Time to think. Time to decide if anything between us has been real. Something like panic flashed in Daniel's eyes. Where will you go? To my parents, Emily decided in that moment. Just for a few days. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, accepting her decision with the same control he brought to all aspects of his life. Take the time you need. But know this, Emily, I will be here waiting when you're ready to talk. I'm not walking away from what we've built together. The fierce determination in his voice followed Emily as she packed an overnight bag, as she drove through the gathering darkness to her childhood home, as she explained to her concerned parents that she needed sanctuary for a few days. It was only when she was alone in her old bedroom that Emily allowed herself to cry for the trust that had been broken, for the relationship built on shifting sand, for the heart she'd given to a man whose obsession with revenge might have poisoned any chance for real love between them. The question that haunted her as she finally drifted into restless sleep was whether Daniel Grayson had ever truly seen her, or if she had only ever been a pawn in his elaborate game of revenge. Chapter 8. Desperate measures. 3 days passed in the sanctuary of her childhood home. 3 days of Emily alternating between anger and grief, between righteous indignation, and a longing so acute it felt like physical pain. Her parents gave her space, asking no questions beyond what she volunteered, though she caught the knowing glances they exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. On the 4th morning, Emily woke to find her phone filled with missed calls and messages, not from Daniel, who had respected her request for space, with a discipline that was both admirable and infuriating. But from Olivia, Daniel's sister, "Emily, call me. It's about Daniel. It's urgent." Something cold settled in Emily's stomach as she dialed Olivia's number. The woman answered on the first ring. Finally, Olivia said, dispensing with pleasantries, "Have you seen the news?" "No," Emily admitted. She'd been avoiding all forms of media, unwilling to see gossip about her sudden separation from Daniel splashed across society pages. "What's happened?" "Daniel's been detained for questioning." Olivia's voice was tightly controlled, but Emily could hear the undercurrent of panic. "The SEC has opened a formal investigation into alleged securities fraud. James is claiming Daniel manipulated trading patterns, specifically targeting Harrington Holdings over a 3-year period." Emily's legal background from her years working with the Foundation's compliance team kicked in. SEC investigations required substantial evidence to move forward, especially against someone of Daniel's stature. The timing aligned perfectly with what Daniel had admitted about his vendetta against the Harrington family, but the specific accusations suggested James had been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "When?" Emily managed. "Last night." Olivia took an audible breath. "There's more. The source of the allegations, it's James Harrington." "Of course it was." Emily closed her eyes, pieces falling into terrible alignment. The photographs delivered to her office, her subsequent departure from the mansion, her public absence from Daniel's side, suggesting marital discord. It was James's countermove in the twisted game between him and Daniel, a game in which he had always been just a pawn. "Where is Daniel now?" Emily asked, already moving to her closet, pulling out clothes. "Released on bail an hour ago. He's at home." "But Emily," Olivia hesitated. "He's not himself. I've never seen him like this." The image of Daniel, controlled, powerful Daniel, broken by circumstances, was difficult to reconcile. Yet Emily felt a tug of concern that overrode her lingering anger. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said, ending the call before Olivia could respond. The mansion appeared unchanged as Emily drove through the security gates, yet something in the atmosphere felt different, heavier, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Edward met her at the door, relief evident in his usually impassive features. "He's in his study." "Mrs. Grayson." He's been. The butler hesitated, searching for an appropriate word. Unreachable since his return. Emily nodded her understanding and made her way through the silent house. The door to Daniel's study was closed but unlocked. She entered without knocking, steeling herself for whatever she might find. The elegant room was in disarray, papers scattered across the desk. A crystal tumbler shattered on the floor beside an open bottle of scotch. Daniel stood by the window, his back to the door, tension evident in every line of his body. He wore the same clothes he'd had on when she left days before, now rumpled, as though he'd slept in them or hadn't slept at all. "If you've come to gloat, Olivia, save it," he said without turning, his voice rough with exhaustion or emotion. "I'm not in the mood." "It's not Olivia," Emily said quietly. Daniel whirled around, shock registering on his face before he masked it with the control that was so fundamental to his character. But not before Emily glimpsed something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "Emily," he spoke her name like a man in the desert might speak of water, with desperate longing and disbelief. "You're here." "Olivia called me." Emily remained by the door, maintaining physical distance, though her heart urged her forward. "She told me what happened." A bitter smile twisted Daniel's lips. "James's revenge. Perfectly timed, wasn't it? Wait until my wife leaves me, then strike while I'm distracted." "Is it true?" Emily asked, needing to hear it from him. "Did you manipulate markets to damage Harrington Holdings?" Daniel held her gaze steadily. "Yes, and a dozen other things over the past decade that would horrify your ethical sensibilities." His honesty was brutal, unapologetic. "I told you from the beginning what kind of man I am. What drives me." "Revenge," Emily said softly. "Justice," Daniel corrected, his voice hardening. "Charles Harrington destroyed my father, drove him to suicide, and then used his connections to ensure there would be no legal consequences. James inherited not just his father's company, but his ethical bankruptcy." Emily moved further into the room, stepping carefully around the broken glass. "And what will your revenge cost you?" "Your freedom, your company, your future." Something flashed in Daniel's eyes, defeat. "Perhaps, or simple exhaustion. At this point, what does it matter? I've lost the only thing that was beginning to mean more to me than revenge." The raw confession hung between them, stripping away pretense and calculation. "You mean me," Emily said, not a question, but a realization. "Yes." Daniel ran a hand through his disheveled hair, a gesture so unlike his usual controlled demeanor that it revealed more than words could about his emotional state. "I never expected that to happen, never wanted it to happen. Caring for someone, it makes you vulnerable." "Yes." Emily agreed softly. It does. Silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken words and painful truths. Daniel was the first to break it. Why are you here? Emily, you made it clear you needed space from me. From what you discovered, Emily found herself moving closer, drawn despite her lingering hurt, because, regardless of how our relationship began, I've come to care for you. And because something about James's timing feels too convenient, Daniel's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The photographs arriving at my office, my leaving you, your immediate arrest afterward. Emily shook her head. It's too coordinated, too perfect. Understanding dawned in Daniel's expression. You think James planned this? That he's been watching both of us? I think, Emily said carefully, that James is capable of calculating manipulation, something you both share. Apparently, Daniel didn't deny the assessment. What are you suggesting? That we stop playing into his hands? Emily stood before Daniel now, close enough to see the shadows beneath his eyes, the strain evident in the tightness around his mouth, that we present a united front instead of fracturing exactly as he hoped we would. Hope flickered in Daniel's expression before he suppressed it. You're proposing we stay together for appearances, continue our arrangement. I'm proposing, Emily said, choosing her words with care, that we work together to understand exactly what James is planning, that we protect each other, regardless of our personal situation. Daniel studied her face, searching for something deception, perhaps, or pity. He found neither, and after, he asked, the question laden with meaning, after we deal with James, what then? Emily reached out, her fingers brushing his hand in the barest touch. I don't know, she admitted honestly. I'm still processing what I learned. I'm still trying to reconcile the man who stalked me with the man I've come to know. Pain flashed across Daniel's features at her words. I never meant to hurt you. I believe that, Emily said, surprising herself with the realization that she did. But intent doesn't erase impact. You violated my privacy, my trust. I know. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. If I could go back. You can't, Emily interrupted gently. Neither of us can. We can only move forward from here. The study door opened before Daniel could respond. Olivia entered, her expression grim. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both need to see. She held out a tablet, a news website displayed on the screen. This just broke. Emily took the tablet, Daniel moving to read over her shoulder. The headline sent ice through her veins. Grayson Empire, built on fraud. SEC investigation expands. Following whistleblower claims, the accompanying photo showed James looking appropriately somber as he spoke to reporters outside the federal building. The article quoted him extensively, painting himself as a reluctant whistleblower forced to come forward by ethical concerns. He's going for the jugular, Olivia said unnecessarily. This isn't just about damaging you anymore. Daniel, he wants to destroy everything you've built. Emily felt Daniel tense beside her, fury radiating from him in almost palpable waves. She placed a restraining hand on his arm. This is what he wants, she reminded him quietly. For you to react emotionally, to make mistakes. Daniel's jaw worked as he visibly fought for control. He won't stop with this. The accusations will keep coming, each more damaging than the last. Then we need to get ahead of this, Emily said, her mind already working through possibilities. We need to understand what evidence he has, what he's planning next. And how do you suggest we do that? Olivia asked, skepticism evident in her tone. Emily met Daniel's gaze, her decision crystallizing in that moment. I'll talk to James. Absolutely not, Daniel said immediately, his hand covering hers with possessive intensity. I won't let you put yourself in his path. I'm already in his path. Emily pointed out, we all are, and I'm the only one he might let his guard down around. She squeezed Daniel's hand, surprising herself with the gesture of comfort. Let me do this. Let me help. Daniel's expression was agonized, torn between his instinct to protect her and the strategic sense her suggestion made. It's dangerous. Yes, Emily agreed simply, but sometimes desperate. Circumstances require desperate measures. Olivia watched their exchange with sharp eyes. She's right, Daniel. James still has feelings for her. That much was obvious at the gala. He'll talk to her when he wouldn't talk to anyone else. Daniel's fingers tightened around Emily's, his internal struggle visible in the tension of his body. Finally, he gave a single sharp nod. On one condition, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. You don't meet him alone. I need to be nearby. Emily considered arguing but recognized the fear beneath his controlling instinct. Agreed. As they began planning how to approach James, Emily felt a strange sense of certainty settle over her. Whatever lay between her and Daniel, the manipulation, the broken trust, the undeniable connection that had grown despite it all, would have to wait. Right now, They needed each other to survive James's systematic destruction of the life they'd built. And perhaps, in fighting together against a common enemy, they might find their way back to the truth of what existed between them, if anything real remained at all. Chapter 9. Savage Truth. The Harrington Tower rose 50 stories above Atlanta's skyline, a gleaming monument to wealth and power. Emily sat in the back of Daniel's car, watching the building grow larger as they approached. Despite her outward composure, her stomach churned with anxiety. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said from beside her, his voice tight with concern. "We can find another way." Emily turned to look at him, noting the strain evident in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. The past 24 hours had been a blur of strategy sessions and legal consultations as they prepared for her meeting with James. "Yes, I do," she said simply. "James won't speak openly with anyone else." Daniel's hand found hers, his fingers warm and strong as they entwined with her own. The simple contact steadied her in ways she wasn't ready to examine. "Remember the plan," he said, not for the first time. "Get him talking about his evidence. Find out where it came from, what else he might have. Don't let him isolate you or change the meeting location." Emily squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I know, and you'll be listening to everything through the earpiece." The transmitter was tiny, virtually invisible once in place. Daniel's security team had provided it along with a hair clip containing a miniature camera. Between the two devices, Daniel would be able to see and hear everything that happened in James's office from the surveillance van parked across the street. At the first sign of trouble, Daniel began. "You'll come charging in like my avenging angel." Emily finished with a small smile. "I know, Daniel." His expression softened momentarily, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Be careful," he said softly. "I can't lose you." The simple declaration hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to fully address. Emily leaned forward impulsively, pressing her lips to his in a brief, gentle kiss. "You won't," she promised against his mouth. James's executive assistant greeted Emily with poorly concealed surprise when she stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor of Harrington Tower. "Mrs. Grayson," the young woman said, the name clearly uncomfortable on her tongue. "Mr. Harrington wasn't expecting you. I'm sure he can make time for an old friend." Emily replied with deliberate emphasis on the last word. "Tell him I'm here alone." The assistant hesitated briefly before picking up her phone. After a murmured conversation, she nodded to Emily. "He'll see you now." James's office occupied the corner of the building, offering panoramic views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He stood as Emily entered, surprise and something else, pleasure, perhaps evident in his expression. "Emily," he said, coming around his massive desk, "this is unexpected." "Is it?" Emily asked coolly, remaining near the door. Through the earpiece, she could hear Daniel's steady breathing, a reassuring reminder that she wasn't truly alone. "After everything that's happened this week, I would think you'd be expecting me." James's smile faltered slightly. "Please, sit down." He gestured to a seating area near the windows, away from his desk. "Can I offer you something to drink?" "No," Emily said, but she moved to the indicated chairs, settling into one with forced casualness. "I'm not here for social pleasantries." "James," he sat across from her, studying her face with an intensity that once would have made her heart race. Now she felt nothing but a cool determination. "Then why are you here?" he asked. Emily met his gaze directly. "I want to know why you're trying to destroy my husband." James flinched slightly at the word husband, confirming Emily's suspicion that he still viewed her as somehow his, despite his own actions. "I'm not trying to destroy anyone," he said, his voice taking on the practiced sincerity she'd once found so persuasive. "I'm simply bringing potentially illegal activities to light, as any responsible businessman would." After conveniently sending me photographic evidence that would drive a wedge between Daniel and me, Emily noted, "Quite the coincidence in timing." James had the grace to look momentarily discomforted. "You received photographs. Don't insult me, intelligence," Emily said sharply. "The photos were delivered to my office the day before. You went to the authorities with your accusations against Daniel. You wanted me to leave him, to be emotionally vulnerable and alone when you made your move." Through the earpiece, Emily heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, but he remained silent, allowing her to lead the conversation as they'd planned. James leaned forward, his expression softening into the concerned look he'd perfected over years of manipulating others. "Emily, I'm worried about you. Grayson is dangerous, a man obsessed with revenge who's been stalking you for months. Those photos weren't meant to hurt you, they were meant to protect you." "How did you get them?" Emily asked. Ignoring his concern as the performance it was, James hesitated, clearly calculating how much to reveal. "I have sources who've been monitoring Grayson's activities for some time. When they informed me he was watching you, I became concerned. Concerned enough to wait until after our wedding to share this information." Emily asked skeptically, I didn't know until recently, James claimed, though something in his eyes suggested otherwise. And by then, you were already married to him. I needed to approach the situation delicately. By sending anonymous photographs to my office and then having my husband arrested the next day, Emily said flatly, "Very delicate." James stood abruptly, moving to a cabinet where he poured himself a drink, without offering Emily one again. When he turned back to her, his handsome face had hardened. "What do you want? Emily, why are you really here?" "I told you. I want to understand why you're targeting Daniel." James took a slow sip of his drink, studying her over the rim of his glass. "Perhaps I'm simply returning the favor. Grayson has been systematically attacking my company for years. And you only just noticed?" Emily asked with deliberate skepticism. Something dangerous flashed in James's eyes. "I've known about his vendetta for some time, but I needed the right opportunity to respond." His gaze traveled over her in a way that made Emily's skin crawl. "He provided that opportunity when he took you." The possessive phrasing wasn't lost on Emily. Through the earpiece, she heard Daniel's low growl of anger. "I'm not a possession to be taken. James," she said coldly, "you gave up any claim to me when you walked away at the altar." Pain flashed across James's features, quickly masked. "That was a mistake, one I've regretted every day since." "A mistake?" Emily repeated incredulously. "You humiliated me in front of everyone we know, and you call it a mistake?" James rose, his expression hardening. "Sophia, you mean, among others, I suspect," Emily said, remembering the text messages she'd glimpsed, the late nights he'd explained away with work commitments. James moved closer, into her personal space. "That's all in the past. He made mistakes. Yes, but everything I've done since that day at the altar has been for you to protect you from a dangerous man, to create a path for us to find our way back to each other." Emily felt a chill at his words, at the obsessive light in his eyes. This wasn't about business rivalry anymore. This was personal in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. "There is no us, James," she said firmly. "I'm married to Daniel. A marriage built on lies and manipulation." James countered. "He pursued you as part of his vendetta against me. Everything between you is tainted by that beginning." The words struck too close to Emily's own doubts, but she refused to let James see her uncertainty. "You know nothing about my marriage. I know Grayson," James said, his voice hardening. "I know what drives him, and I know he'll sacrifice anything, including you, to achieve his revenge." Through the earpiece, Emily heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, but again he remained silent, honoring their agreement to let her handle the conversation. "If you know Daniel so well," Emily said, steering the conversation back to her purpose, "then you must know what evidence you'll need to truly destroy him. What exactly do you have?" James, a triumphant smile curved his lips, enough to send him to prison for years. "Financial records, showing market manipulation, evidence of corporate espionage, witness testimony about his obsessive surveillance of both of us." "Both of us," Emily repeated. Latching onto the revealing phrase, James realized his mistake too late. "I mean, his surveillance of my business activities." "No," Emily said, certainty crystallizing. "You meant what you said. Daniel was watching you, and you were watching him watching me." She took a step closer, pieces falling into place. "You knew about his surveillance from the beginning, didn't you? You knew he was interested in me long before our wedding day." James's expression confirmed her suspicion before he could deny it. Emily felt sick as the full truth became clear. "You used me," she said softly, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You pursued me, proposed to me, planned an elaborate wedding, all to draw Daniel into the open." "No, Emily, it wasn't like that," James began, but Emily cut him off. "Stop lying," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "For once in your life, tell the truth. That's why you left me at the altar, isn't it? Not because of Sophia, not because of commitment issues. You abandoned me publicly, to hurt me so badly that Daniel would feel compelled to step in." James's silence was confirmation enough. "You bastard," Emily whispered, genuine horror in her voice. "You orchestrated the most humiliating moment of my life as part of some twisted game between you and Daniel." Through the earpiece, she heard Daniel cursing softly, his anger palpable even from a distance. James's expression hardened. "If you want to talk about being used, ask your husband about his obsession with destroying my family. Ask him what he was planning to do with you before I forced his hand at the wedding." "I already know," Emily said simply. "Daniel has been honest with me about his intentions, his mistakes, which is more than I can say for you." James moved with unexpected speed, grabbing her arms in a grip tight enough to bruise. "He doesn't deserve you," he hissed, his handsome face twisted with anger. "He never did." "Let go of me," Emily said evenly, refusing to show fear, though her heart pounded against her ribs. "Let's be honest, Emily," James continued as if she hadn't spoken. his fingers digging into her flesh. You don't love him. You can't. He's incapable of real emotion. Everything is calculated, designed to achieve his ends. Like you, Emily challenged, trying to pull away from his painful grasp. At least Daniel admits who he is. You hide your manipulation behind charm and false concern. James's hands tightened further. I am concerned. He's corrupted you, turned you against me. You did that yourself. Emily interrupted. The moment you walked away from me at the altar, something dangerous flashed in James's eyes. A tactical error I intend to correct. His voice dropped lower. When Grayson is in prison, when his empire is dismantled, you'll see clearly again. You'll remember what we had. We had nothing, Emily said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Just your lies and my willingness to believe them. James's control snapped. He yanked her against him, his mouth crashing down on hers in a brutal parody of a kiss. Emily struggled against him, turning her face away, pushing at his chest. Stop, she gasped, panic rising as his arms locked around her, preventing escape. You still feel something, James insisted, his breath hot against her neck as she turned away from his kiss. I know you do. The only thing I feel for you is disgust, Emily said, bringing her knee up sharply. James doubled over with a grunt of pain. His grip loosening enough for Emily to break free, she backed away, putting the coffee table between them as he straightened, fury contorting his features. You ungrateful bitch, he spat, all pretense of concerned former lover vanishing. After everything I've done, after everything you've done, Emily repeated incredulously. You abandoned me at the altar as a tactical move in your feud with Daniel. You manipulated my pain, my humiliation, for your own ends. James's expression confirmed the truth of her words. It was necessary, he said coldly. Grayson needed to be drawn out, forced to show his hand. Your pain was collateral damage. The casual cruelty of the statement stole Emily's breath. Through the earpiece, she heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, followed by his voice, tight, with controlled fury. Get out of there, Emily. Now. But Emily stood her ground, a strange calm settling over her, as the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. It was never about me at all, was it? For either of you, I was just leverage in your toxic game. That's not true, James protested, but the flicker of guilt in his eyes told a different story. Isn't it? Emily asked softly. You pursued me because you knew Daniel was watching. You proposed to me because you knew it would enrage him. You left me at the altar because you calculated that my public humiliation would force him to reveal himself. James's silence was damning, and it worked perfectly. Emily continued, the bitter truth spilling out between them. Daniel stepped in exactly as you predicted. He married me, thinking he was stealing your prize, when all along, you were manipulating both of us. Not everything was calculated, James said, his voice dropping to that persuasive tone she'd once found so compelling. My feelings for you are genuine, Emily. They always have been. Save it, Emily said, her voice cold with finality. I don't believe a word you say anymore. She moved toward the door, her purpose accomplished despite the painful revelations. We're done here. James's face hardened. If you walk out that door, if you go back to him, I will destroy him. I have everything I need to put Daniel Grayson in prison for years. Emily paused with her hand on the doorknob. No, she said with quiet certainty. You don't, because if you did, you wouldn't be threatening me. You would have already used it. The flash of frustration in James's eyes confirmed her suspicion. His evidence against Daniel was circumstantial at best, built on implications rather than proof. His real weapon had been the wedge. He tried to drive between them a wedge that, paradoxically, his own revelations had begun to dissolve. This isn't over, James warned as she opened the door. Emily looked back at him one last time, seeing clearly the man she'd once thought she loved. Handsome, charming, and utterly hollow at his core. Yes, she said simply, it is. As the elevator doors closed behind her, as she made her way through the lobby and out into the bright Atlanta sunshine, Emily felt a strange lightness despite the painful truths she'd uncovered. For the first time since her abandoned wedding, she saw the full picture of what had happened to her. How she'd been caught between two men driven by vengeance and pride, both willing to use her as a pawn in their dangerous game. The difference, she realized as she spotted Daniel waiting for her across the street, was that one of them had evolved beyond the game. One of them had found something more valuable than revenge. The question that remained, as Daniel rushed to meet her, his face tight with concern and barely controlled fury, was whether that evolution had come too late for them to build something real from the ashes of manipulation and lies. Chapter 10. Eternal Claiming. The ocean roared beneath them, waves crashing against the cliffs with primal fury. As the storm gathered on the horizon, Emily stood at the edge of the terrace, wind whipping her hair around her face. watching lightning illuminate the darkening sky in brilliant flashes. Nature's violence mirrored the tumult in her heart as she waited for Daniel to return. 3 days had passed since her confrontation with James, 3 days of legal battles as Daniel fought to clear his name, of revelations as James's carefully constructed accusations unraveled under scrutiny, 3 days of Emily and Daniel circling each other with cautious distance, both wounded by truth, yet drawn together by something neither could fully name. They had not touched since her return from James's office, not in anger, not in passion. The absence of contact was its own form of exquisite torture. Behind her, the glass doors slid open. Emily didn't turn, recognizing Daniel's presence by the shift in the air around her, by the sudden quickening of her pulse. He stood beside her, close but not touching, his gaze fixed on the gathering storm as hers was. "It's over," he said simply, his voice barely audible above the wind. Emily turned to look at him then, studying the harsh lines of his profile, the tension still evident in the set of his jaw. "James is withdrawing all allegations," Daniel confirmed. His evidence was circumstantial at best, fabricated at worst. Once the SEC investigators recognized the personal vendetta behind his claims, they began questioning his motives. Relief whispered through Emily, though she kept her expression neutral. "What happens now?" Daniel's silver blue eyes met hers, storm-dark with emotions she couldn't fully read. "That depends entirely on you." The simple acknowledgement of her power in this moment took her breath away. This man, who had manipulated circumstances with calculated precision, who had married her partly for revenge, was surrendering control of their future to her hands. "Why me?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Daniel turned fully to face her, the wind tousling his dark hair. Lightning flashes, illuminating the raw vulnerability in his expression. "Because I love you," he said, the words stripped of artifice or calculation. "Because somewhere between vengeance and possession, between manipulation and truth, I fell in love with you." The confession hung between them, more powerful for its simplicity. Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes, though whether from pain or joy, she couldn't tell. "How can I trust that?" she whispered. "How can I trust anything between us when it began with lies?" Daniel stepped closer, still not touching her, though she could feel the heat of his body like a tangible force. "You can't," he admitted, brutal in his honesty. "Not yet. Perhaps not ever. I've given you every reason to doubt me." "Yes," Emily agreed, the single syllable carrying the weight of her pain. "You have. I won't insult you with promises." Daniel continued, "Words are too easily spoken, too frequently broken. All I can offer is time. Time to prove through actions that what began in calculation has transformed into something real." Thunder rolled across the sky as Emily studied his face, searching for deception and finding only raw truth. "And if I walk away?" she asked, needing to test the boundaries of his surrender. "If I end our marriage now?" Something like desolation flickered in Daniel's eyes, but his voice remained steady. "Then I'll let you go. With everything. The house, half my fortune, your complete freedom." The offer surprised her, not for its generosity, but for the absence of fight in it. Just like that, no manipulation, no schemes to win me back. "No," Daniel said simply, "I've learned at least that much. You can't possess a person, Emily. You can only earn the privilege of standing beside them." The wisdom in his words, hard-won through pain and loss, touched something deep within her. Emily reached out, her fingertips grazing his cheek in the barest contact. Daniel remained perfectly still, as though afraid any movement might shatter this fragile moment. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," she whispered, "but I do know I can't walk away." The first raindrop fell between them, cold against her heated skin. Others followed quickly, the storm breaking overhead with sudden fury. Neither moved to seek shelter, the cleansing rain somehow appropriate to this moment of truth between them. "Why?" Daniel asked, his voice rough with emotion. "After everything you've learned, why stay?" Emily stepped closer, close enough that their bodies touched, water streaming down their faces like tears. "Because, despite how it began, what grew between us is real. Because when James had me cornered, when I felt his hands on me, the only name in my heart was yours." Something broke in Daniel's expression, to the last wall of control crumbling as he gathered her into his arms with desperate need. His mouth found hers, rain-slick and hungry, the kiss transcending physical desire to become communion. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered against her lips, his hands threading through her wet hair, as though to anchor her to him. "When I heard him touch you, heard the fear in your voice. I've never known rage like that." "I'm here," Emily assured him, her arms locking around his neck as the storm raged around them. "I'm choosing to be here." The significance of her words, the deliberate choice rather than manipulation or circumstance, was not lost on either of them. Daniel lifted her into his arms with unconscious strength, carrying her through the rain into the warmth of their home. In their bedroom, they undressed each other with reverent hands, each touch an affirmation, each kiss a promise. When Daniel laid her on their bed, when he covered her body with his own, Emily felt something shift between them, transformation rather than possession, mutual surrender rather than conquest. "I claim you," Emily whispered against his mouth as he entered her. The words, a deliberate echo of his possessive declarations in the past, not as a possession, but as the keeper of my heart. Daniel's rhythm faltered at her words, emotion raw in his expression. "And I surrender to you," he responded, the most powerful man she knew laying his strength at her feet. "Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours to claim or reject." Their bodies moved together with rising urgency, finding a rhythm as ancient as the storm raging outside. When release claimed them, it was simultaneous and shattering, pulling cries from both their throats that mingled in the heated air between them. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, heartbeats gradually slowing, skin cooling, in the aftermath of passion, Daniel traced the curve of Emily's cheek with gentle fingers. "Stay with me," he whispered, the words both plea and prayer. Emily curled closer, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder that seemed made for her. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "We begin again from here, not from manipulation or revenge, not from desperation or calculation, from choice, from truth." Daniel's arms tightened around her, his lips pressing against her temple. "From love," he added softly, the word unfamiliar on his tongue yet perfect in this moment. "From love," Emily agreed, the admission no longer frightening now that all pretense had been stripped away. Outside, the storm began to subside, rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. Inside, two souls who had found each other through darkness now stood at the threshold of something neither had truly believed possible. A love born of manipulation but purified by truth. A connection forged in revenge but tempered by forgiveness. As dawn painted the horizon in delicate gold, Emily and Daniel stood at the edge of their private beach, the same spot where she had walked alone after discovering his surveillance, questioning everything between them. Now they faced each other, no witnesses, no spectacle standing on the same marble altar. Steps that had been salvaged from the cathedral where their story began. "How far we've come from that day," Emily whispered, her fingers tracing the scar on his palm from when he'd smashed a glass after James's accusation. From manipulation to truth. Daniel's eyes, once guarded, even in intimacy, now held nothing but raw vulnerability. "I claimed you then, without right or permission," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Standing in that cathedral where he abandoned you, I saw only an opportunity. And now," she prompted, needing to hear the words, "now I understand what it truly means to belong to someone." He placed a simple platinum band on her finger, replacing the hasty one from their first wedding. "I claim you not as revenge or triumph, but as my heart, my home, my salvation." Tears gathered in Emily's eyes as she took the matching ring. "And I claim you," she responded, sliding it onto his finger where no ring had been before. Not from desperation or humiliation, but from choice and fierce, clear-eyed love. The woman who stood broken at that altar could never have imagined this moment. Their kiss, tender yet passionate. Sealed promises neither had believed possible when they first stood at an altar together. The rising sun gilded their entwined figures with golden light, nature itself seeming to bless this union, built not on perfect pasts, but on the perfect honesty of their present. What had begun as beautiful devastation had transformed into eternal, claiming two souls recognizing in each other not just passion or convenience, but home,